Sargon of Akkad is being sued by Akilah Hughes for copyright infringement. I have talked about this in the past, but now it seems like he might actually be about to win. But don't take my word for it. I'm not an expert. So we brought in someone who is an expert, YouTuber Law, who you can introduce yourself in a second. But we're also going to talk about Cassandra Fairbanks suing Emma Roller for essentially calling her a white supremacist or saying she flashed a white supremacy hand gesture. And then we have the Maddox versus Dick Masterson lawsuit. There are just so many different legal issues hitting the internet right now, from the Trump Twitter thing to a Jared Taylor, white nationalist thing, to Sargon. I felt, you know what, we need to come down and speak to somebody who knows what's going on. So we did. This is the Culture War Podcast. So thanks for joining in. My name is Tim Poole. I'm a journalist. You can find me on Twitter at Timcast. And if you're not on my YouTube channel, it's youtube.com/Timcast. Joining me today are...
I'm Emily Molly. I'm also a journalist. I'm on Twitter at MomesMolly, MOMESMOLLI.
And...
Hi, I'm Lior Lesser. I'm on YouTube at YouTuber Law, and also on Twitter /YouTuber Law.
So you're the expert.
I'm supposed to be one, yeah.
Supposed to be. So, long story short, and I'll let you carry this away, but I saw this story break out that Akilah Hughes, who is a YouTuber, is suing Sargon of Akkad, who is a YouTuber. And to me, it kind of felt more like a social justice versus anti-social justice warrior kind of thing, because Akilah is definitely on what we would call like the far left of social justice politics, and Sargon is like this anti-SJW, they call it. So when the lawsuit came out, Akilah accused Sargon of copyright infringement, and I kind of felt like it was more political than anything. But now I saw one of your videos
right,
where you basically outlined that it might be over. So why don't you just, we'll start with this story. We've got a ton of other stories we're going to talk about, but why don't you just lead us through what's going on so far? Or, yeah, what happened?
Right. So let me just give you my side perspective on it, that politics don't really, are not that important to me. I couldn't care less which side you're on. I look at this purely from a legal perspective and wherever it falls. And the story came to me probably from one of the viewers, because I don't follow either one of these individuals, so I don't really know. Probably somebody sent it to me. And what seems to have happened was fairly simple, and you've seen it other places on YouTube especially, that somebody uploads a video, in this case Akilah Hughes. Somebody else uses that video in the creation of their own video, and the question of whether or not this is copyright infringement. In this case, I believe you're looking at Akilah Hughes, who filmed a video both of herself and what's happening around her during the election day. She was following the campaign of Clinton, and she titled the video, we thought she would win, where you can see her basically going through the motions of being very, very happy, obviously in the beginning of the night, talking about all the great things that are going to happen. And over the course of the evening, you see how things are changing, obviously. And
that was her video.
That was her video.
That still sounds kind of funny.
It's actually, I mean, I have to admit, it was kind of interesting to listen to, because you see differences in emotions of what's happening. Now, she's talking often, expressing her opinion, and that changes, but she's also filming. And that video, if I have to guess, is about 15 minutes long. Sargon sees that video. He basically chops it up, only takes the portion where she is actually speaking, so it's her own monologue, puts that together. So let's say it's less than 2 minutes long. So it's about 10, 12, 13% in total time worth of the video. He puts it up and then titles it SJW State of Mind, something like that.
Levels of awareness or something like that?
Something like that, yeah. Right. So the video is a chopped up version of hers, where he takes her opinions only and then puts a title. She files for a DMCA. YouTube takes it down. Now, normally he would file a counter DMCA notice, and YouTube within 10 days will have to put it back up. Just that's the way the law is. They're not an arbiter. They just follow the way the law is. But this time they didn't, because she filed notice with YouTube that she's going to file a lawsuit. And that's the one thing that can stop your video from being put back up. And that is basically where things stood. YouTube did not put it back up. She filed a lawsuit claiming copyright infringement, saying effectively that he didn't do anything creative, that basically his video, which is a chopped up version of hers, is copyright infringement.
So before, there's been a bunch of back and forth between the two.
Right.
When I first saw this case, a bunch of other YouTubers, general internet personalities, were saying, Sargon, you didn't do anything. Like, this is copyright infringement.
Many, including some attorneys on YouTube.
Yeah, people were saying, oh, this is it, you're going to lose. And then I actually started digging into it, and I found some examples of other artists who pushed the boundary. And I thought, well, if these other cases are not,
Right.
then wouldn't Sargon's titling of the video be his commentary? So that was just my thought. I'm not a lawyer. So I want to, before we get into the actual back and forth,
Right.
what are your thoughts on the case from the very beginning? If someone came to you and said this is what happened, would you advise them to sue?
No, I thought that there is... Okay, it's not a frivolous lawsuit. We're dealing here with a concept called fair use, which in itself is a very, very complicated legal defense. It's our ability to use somebody else's content and not be accused of copyright infringement. Legally, it's very, very complicated because there's no one way of actually ruling what is fair use. There are some guidelines, but generally the judge can make any decision they want to. So it's not a frivolous lawsuit in that she can claim it is. But once you go through it, I think that, and this is definitely an area where two attorneys can have completely opposite opinions on it. I think that he did sufficient here to actually transform what he took as hers into something completely different. And that's really the key. The single most important part in the whole analysis is this concept of transformativeness, where you take somebody else's work, create something else. You know, we saw that in the H3 case. That was the heart of the argument in H3 that, you know, did they take Haas's video? I forgot his full name exactly. Did they chopped up his video and then added commentary in between? That went all the way to complete judgment, and it was found to be fair use. That was classic way. That's how you think of fair use.
That case was really crazy to me. I mean, for people who aren't familiar, it was basically H3H3, this big YouTube channel, taking clips and criticizing the statements of this individual. That's textbook fair use as far as I know, right?
It's about fair use as you can get.
Yeah.
People keep talking about how this is going to set a precedent. No, it's not. It's actually a judge ruling exactly the way it should have been. It's a pain, obviously, because you get sued. These lawsuits are incredibly expensive. You're looking probably to defend yourself all the way up through judgment. You're looking probably at $150,000 and up. Wow. The legal system is not designed to help you defend yourself. That's why a lot of times people get sued and they settle. And a lot of people sue people just because they want to get a settlement. You know, that's a part of our unfortunate legal system.
So one of the first things that, Akilah put out a video.
Yes.
Addressing it, where she said it's not like H3H3 at all. But you think it was?
Oh, I think... Okay, so there have been other cases. This is not new, and things did not start with the internet. We've had lots of different content creators over the years, and the amount of work you have to do to transform somebody else's work into your own, something that would not be otherwise considered copyright infringement, is relatively minimal here. And it's all involved really what you're doing with it. If you're doing it for commentary purposes, for criticism, for satire, for educational purposes, that's really what drives transformativeness here. And we've seen it with artists who literally took, called, I forgot now the term of those kind of art. Basically, they take appropriation artists. Exactly. They take somebody else's work, they do minimal change, and they sell it as their own. People feel it's unfair, and I can understand that. I worked on a photograph. I'll sell it for $100. You put a little comment at the bottom and sell it for $10,000. I'm upset. Doesn't mean that it's I can sue you for it. The amount of requirement, because especially when you are using your bit of change to make a commentary or criticism, that's something that's highly protected, basically largely involving the First Amendment rights. It basically considers that the First Amendment is almost an exception to copyright infringement. And what people don't understand often is that it's not as if the Constitution, because copyright is built into the Constitution, it's not as if there is a recognition that you as a creator are owed something. There's no natural rights. You have a natural right to maybe happiness, some inalienable rights to happiness and pursuit of whatever. But that's not copyright. Copyright is seen as something that is granted to you for the sole purpose of benefiting society. So it's going to grant you a copyright in this podcast so that I can actually criticize you, I can comment you. That's where the Constitution sees the value in society actually using it, and that's what led to the whole fair use argument.
Is there an extent at which a comment isn't enough of a comment? Like, so let's say I took a photo you took of a beautiful hummingbird, and I just put a comment at the bottom saying this is a hummingbird. Yeah, is that fair use?
Probably not, because that's not a commentary. That's not a criticism. You're looking at certain things.
What if I said ugly hummingbird?
Interesting. I think you would lose because because you would go in front of a judge who has to be sympathetic to your cause. Right. And a judge can decide anything. So if you did something like this photographer was an idiot, right? Or or you taking this bird and you're making a comment about how this bird would really play well in a Pokemon game. See, there you're getting into something where you are adding content to that, and that probably wouldn't be enough to tip it.
So what if, so we're going to do this podcast, it'll end up being about an hour.
Right.
What if someone took the whole hour and then before they started said, look, you guys got to see this, how dumb these guys are. You need to listen to this full thing. These guys are so dumb. And then at the end said, wasn't I right? Aren't they dumb? Is that also fair use, like the full thing?
That's a great question. The problem is there's no good answer to it. That's what makes this fair use such a difficult subject, because we have cases on all sides. We have a case, this goes back to not Playboy, Penthouse, okay? Goes back a few years, a classic case where Penthouse, used to be this advertisement involving Campari liquor, basically, where they did advertisements in magazine where they said, the first time I had, it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, supposed to be the first time, think about first time you had sex, but it's really about the first time you had Campari. And they had this famous actors doing it, so it was a very, very popular, very successful campaign for Campari. Penthouse sees that, says, we're going to do that, but for televangelists. And so they did this kind of a paid advertisement within their own magazine, talking about some famous televangelists at the time, saying, this is the first time, and it's designed in tongue-in-cheek about the first time he had sex in an outhouse with his mother. Very, very different, okay? So this led, obviously, the guy sued for defamation, lost. I can criticize, you're a public figure, I can criticize you all I want in the world. But then what he did, he wanted to raise money for his lawsuit. He took the entire article and included it in mailings to all of his fans and contributors. And Penthouse then sues him, says, he did nothing to our article. He literally sent an entire copy of it. And that was still found to be fair use. Whoa. Because the court said, even though it's in entirety, it's the only way he can express his voice, which is, I need money to fight these assholes, right? These people are hurting us, they're hurting society, and I need it. So the court at that point recognized that 100% can be fair use.
Without just by
nothing,
showing the full thing.
Complete copy, basically a Xerox copy, a photocopy of an article. And we have things on the very, very other end where they looked at, it was a famous Two Live Crew lawsuit where the music company by Roy Orbison sued Two Live Crew because they'd included like a few notes out of what would be recognized as Pretty Woman. And the court says, even 3 notes, because the beginning of that song is so recognizable, even that can be copyright infringement. So we saw minimal that is copyright infringement, and we saw 100% that is not. So it's completely messed up and very difficult. So giving directions ahead of time to what would be fair use is almost impossible.
I'm curious just how much context has to do with it, because Sargon of Akkad is known as a commentator. Is that taken into account at all, or
context is everything?
Yeah. Because
you can make it the same exactly. I could have done the same video and posted, and it may not have been.
Oh wow.
And that's really key to the whole issue, because when the lawsuit was drafted by Akilah's attorney, they started out by defining who Sargon of Akkad is, saying that he criticizes me, he often goes after me, he labels me as SJW, which is she defined as a negative term. So she defined him in such a way as somebody who criticizes her. And by the way, he created this. That's why when eventually Sargon came to reply to it, and there was a lot of issues about it. It was a badly run lawsuit to begin with. From Akilah's end, they tried serving him by sending FedEx, no signature required, to London. If you get sued in the United States, somebody's going to knock on the door and make you sign something. So weird stuff like that happened, and Sargon actually let it go. He didn't actually fight it. But now I lost my place here.
She in the suit said he was criticizing
her. Okay, so he was criticizing her. So when Sargon eventually filed a motion to dismiss, which really was the first time they spoke, there was no answer. It's a motion to dismiss. He actually identified the idea that his attorney is that she's acknowledging that this is criticism, because she wrote all this. This is who this guy is. He criticizes me. And then we don't have to really go much further, because if it's criticism, then it's transformativeness, because that's what the law is designed to protect.
So there might actually be something in not just a single video, but maybe even like a body of work. But I'll ask you that in a second because I think Emily was going to ask something.
Well, so was that her fault or her lawyer's fault for bringing his body of work into it? Was that personal for her?
Okay, so at the beginning, I would have said it was an unforced error. They didn't have to give him that. They didn't have to describe him in such a way. They could have just described him, because the judge probably doesn't know who he is anyway. They could have described him as just a commentator, something very, very simple. You don't want to give the other side any simple layups there. But the problem is that, and I could have explained it away, because Sargon's attorneys right away jumped on that as proof that she's admitting to it. But I said, you know what? Not a big deal, because if I'm her attorneys, I could probably explain it away. I probably would have explained it. No. We meant to say that in general, he is criticizing her, that he's critiquing her, but this particular time he didn't do it. He created something non-transform. They could have come out of it. But then she changes attorneys. We don't know why. My gut feeling, why do you change attorneys, right?
They gave up?
Well, depends. I mean, if they're doing it for free because they're looking at getting publicity, maybe they gave up because they see no chance of winning anything. Or they got, it's quite possible, because you see that also, that they get a lot of negative publicity from the other side, because Sargon has very dedicated following.
Yeah.
They could have just said, you know what, this is not worth our time. It's too, and then they withdrew. It's quite possible also, because usually why you let go of one attorney and go for another was you can't pay them. You know, it's costing too much. You start a lawsuit, you're all gung-ho. You start realizing that there is hourly fees here, and every little document, every little argument is costing you thousands of dollars. You know, you might be able to switch. So she went from a larger firm to a much smaller firm.
Oh, wow.
And we didn't know much until they filed basically a motion against his motion to dismiss. So now it's the first time this. So the first one had like an unforced error, which I think was fixable, but the second law firm now doubled down on it, basically. He basically said that Sargon says that this video was critical of him. That's not really important what Akilah thought. What's important, and they came up with a different standard. Okay?
Yeah.
So their idea was that if that it's not the right standard. It doesn't make a difference what people think. It doesn't make a difference what Akilah thinks or what Sargon thinks. You have to go to the reasonable man. Now, it's true that is the overall standard for fair use. You base it on what a reasonable person thinks. You know, what the audience thinks. Do they think it's critical, it's commentary? That's true as a general concept, but it's a complete error in this part. And that's why when they actually admitted, in my opinion, they killed their case here. In that they are in a motion to dismiss. In a motion to dismiss, what you do is you take all of the plaintiff's argument and you assume it's absolutely true. You ignore everything that Sargon says, you take everything Akilah says, and he says, everything is absolutely true. Now, if I take all of that as true, is there a plausible claim here? Can she plausibly get anything out of this case? The problem is, you're also not allowed to bring any extrinsic evidence into it. So you've got a motion to dismiss. You have to take all her stuff as absolutely true. You can't bring proof of anything else. So the only basis that you can ever show fair use is based on those two parties' perspective. And she also admitted that the Second Circuit, which is the circuit in New York, the federal circuit, has accepted fair use as a viable defense within this motion to dismiss, and which is a true thing. So you can do it. So the only way, they built themselves into a corner where you have to accept their opinion, what either party actually does, or the judge's opinion, which is the only other party, as to fair use, as to transformative, because you're never allowed to go to ask the average person. You can't run some sort of a poll, some sort of a study on it. So they create a situation where it's the minute she accepted it, the minute they admitted, and admitted actually on two different situations within the party that within the document that she accepted it, it was transformative, essentially, that he it was critical of her. That, the second point that I wanted to mention, there's a second time where this was discussed, is that they were talking about the title, and they're calling somebody an SJW, and their defense was that, well, not everybody knows what an SJW is, which probably is true. I know what percentage of the population knows. The problem is that they then admitted that she knows. So now she knows what the title means, and she's admitting that it's critical of her. And yet you cannot bring any information from outside to discuss, well, the average person, because that's the rule of law here. It pretty much leaves nowhere for the judge to go except to say, everybody's agreeing, there's no argument of fact here. Why would I inject my opinion into something where everybody agrees? He criticized you, which is fair use.
Yeah. So is it possible that the lawyer just says, I don't like the guy, and then sides
The judge, you mean?
The judge, yeah. Is it possible the judge just says, Sargon guy, sounds like a dick, I'm going to side in favor of Akilah?
He could, but it doesn't come across that way on papers, and unless the judge knows him and doesn't like him, and that's always possible because we've seen other cases where it seems that judges have a sense of the conclusion, not because they're not trying to be professional, because they're human beings, and they think that something is right, and they build a case around that conclusion. So rather than start with that, and that's happened. All in all, most, I think, judges want to be professional. They have good intentions here, so I don't think they will go into it, and especially because the likelihood of the judge knowing who Sargon is and what he stands for is small. The documents themselves that even Akilah wrote don't paint him in a terrible light. Just somebody she disagrees with.
In my opinion, my unprofessional opinion, it seems like a court is more likely to defend free speech even when it's extreme. I mean, or in terms of copyright infringement. I mean, if there's a painter or this artist who can take someone else's photo and then put a silly comment under it, and that's protected, I can't imagine this would be any different than that, right? Am I wrong?
Well, when it comes to first speech, you're absolutely right. We have reached a point in judicial history that the Supreme Court unanimously is supportive of free speech. It completely discounts any concept of hate speech or anything like that. Basically, and there's really no real division of it. And that's true, but copyright infringement is in many ways an exception to free speech. So because, under certain circumstances, you are not allowed to express yourself through somebody else's work. You have to add something to it. Again, there's 4 elements in fair use, only 2 of which are really important. I mean, people argue all 4, but 2 of them are completely irrelevant because no court has ever thought about them. The first and the fourth. The first one says transformative. Did you actually take somebody else's work and create something different? In this case, the argument is, and I think Sargon's attorney were pretty good in defining it, saying that his choice of cuts and edits were a statement in of itself, because he took, again, you think she's going through emotions in her videos, but rather than seeing the entire arc as she wants to show it, he actually picks and chooses and say, look how nonsensical it is. It doesn't make any sense. So he is actually developing an argument different than what she wanted. She just wanted to show, my analysis, that she wanted to show more of her disappointment over time and how things turned out, and he wanted to show different faults in her way of thinking. So his edit were instrumental to begin with. And the second one is that the title itself should be sufficient. And the title is, because they admitted to it, the title is very critical. Now, they're saying it's not enough. But that's a different argument. How much is not? If you're already admitting that it's critical of you, that they called you an SJW, you understand what it is, it's critical of you. Then you're arguing about amounts. It's very...
would a court take into consideration the body of work? So let's say, Sargon puts out like 5 videos that are each very similar, but together clearly represent stark criticism of someone like Akilah. Can they then single out one of those and say, this one is copyright infringement? I guess what I'm trying to say is, can the court look at all of these videos and be like, he's clearly doing a series of, criticisms on you?
Yes, they absolutely could, because we've seen it with artists who take multiple pictures, creating collage. That's the classic one with an artist, the appropriation artist Prince, who has won that case, where he took other people's photographs, put them all together. By virtue of having put it together, it was considered fair use, even though individually it would have been copyright infringement, because he was making a statement through the creation of a collage, even though he didn't really add anything beside putting them together.
Wow.
But I guess again, he sold something for $10,000 that the other artists were selling for maybe $100. It's good to be an appropriation artist sometimes. You're in the wrong business.
Right. I kind of get bummed when I hear, is he the guy who did the Instagram photos?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's a current case.
It's like $100,000. So for those that aren't familiar, this guy, he took other people's photos from Instagram. printed them out, made them all big, and then added comments that had nothing. Like the comments were kind of nonsensical. I looked at them.
It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Admit to it. It has no meaning. It's like literally like jabba wabba. Something
It's
nothing.
just gibberish.
Yeah.
But they were like, well, but it's like he's adding a comment and it's transforming it. So
Well, that's still that still has not been resolved. That's still in the case.
Yeah.
And if he goes based on what he did before, there's a real argument that he would win that.
he's pushing it.
He's pushing it because that's how he makes his money.
You know what I wanted to say though is, as much as I kind of look at that and kind of frown upon it, like, come on, man, you're taking someone else's photo.
I agree.
It shows me where the line is for me, because I'm not going anywhere near.
Yeah.
Just adding a word to someone's photo. I'm
Right.
taking snippets and doing fair use. Someone like H3H3, they're taking clips and then commenting on it. And then you see what this guy Prince is doing, and you're like, okay, I'll stay away from that. I know where I'm good.
You're right, but then again, H3H3 got sued as well.
Oh,
Doesn't
yeah,
mean
right.
that you win,
What's
you're out 200,000. Right?
What's the saying? You can sue a ham sandwich. It doesn't mean you're going to win.
True.
You'll still get
Yeah.
dragged through court.
Yeah.
But do you think the appropriation artist has a good case, just if that's his body of work, is to appropriate like that? Or do you think this one is because it's pushing?
It's right. That's the interesting thing. Whether or not a court looking at gibberish would say that adding gibberish is transformative enough. And you know what? I will leave that up to a judge, because that's really a hard argument to make here. His attorneys would have to be very, very creative in actually defining exactly why gibberish is transformative.
So we've got a ton of other cases to get through to talk about, especially. But I guess we just want to wrap up with the. You said it earlier, but you think Sargon's going to win? You think
I thought he would have won anyway on the merits of the case. I think this was an unforced error that was doubled down by our attorneys. I think they're giving the case away to Sargon. Unless they're in front of a judge who doesn't like to dismiss cases, they are definitely, usually in state court, where they feel that if there's any sort of merit, they want to let it go to a next level, to maybe a summary judgment level. But you don't usually see that in federal court. My gut feeling tells me that based on that this is going to end with this dismissal, you're probably looking at 2 months before the judge actually rules on it. That seems to be the current amount of cases in court. But I think this get dismissed. All
right. Well, I'm sure Akilah hopes it won't, and I'm sure Sargon hopes it will, but we'll see what happens. So now moving on. So we had this story where I'm like, oh, I like the idea of fair use, and I like that the courts are willing to defend this kind of speech and stuff. Now we're going to move on to a story where I'm actually conflicted, and this is the Cassandra Fairbanks versus Emma Roller story. So for those that are listening, if you're not familiar, this was was this a year ago now? Did you know?
This was, I thought it was the end of 16, maybe it's 17.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
It's quite a while.
So basically, Cassandra Fairbanks, who is a journalist, writer, activist, however you want to call it, she's certainly a Trump supporter, right wing. Her and Mike Cernovich, who was also considered like a new right personality, they flashed the OK hand sign in the White House press briefing room. And Emma Roller, who was a writer for what used to be called Fusion and is now called Splinter, said this was two people flashing a white, I believe it was like a white power hand gesture or something she said. Mm-hmm. And that's the basis of it. Ultimately, Cassandra filed a lawsuit against Emma and just recently lost. And this one, I was kind of like, this is where I'm conflicted, because Emma Roller clearly posted misinformation about Cassandra Fairbanks. Absolutely not true. The OK hand sign is not a white supremacy hand gesture. It is a hoax. Even the Anti-Defamation League admits it's a hoax. They've written about it. And I mean, most people who have done even 10 seconds of research know it came from 4chan.
And she even posted after that tweet that it was a hoax from 4chan, and then tries to still say that it has legitimacy.
And she took a photo that originated on 4chan and then put a link from the Anti-Defamation League to try and make it seem like the ADL was actually saying this is, when they totally weren't. To me, that felt like it was deceptive. She was wrong. She knew it was potentially a hoax. She made a false statement, and I thought, wow, From a layman's perspective, this seems like a slam dunk. I mean, any reasonable person who looks at what this woman did is going to say, you put out bad information, you acknowledged it was bad information, you then tried to, presumably, like this is going to be an assumption, but the way you framed the link from the Anti-Defamation League to make it seem like you had evidence when you didn't, all of this says to me, you knew what you're doing, what wasn't lining up. And so I was like, I'm not an expert, but I felt like there was a good chance Cassandra would win, but she didn't.
Right.
So now I want to ask you, because you're the actual expert, how is it, first, like how did she lose, but also, doesn't it kind of suck that someone can lie about you and get away with it?
Wow, that's a huge question. Let's start with the idea that in the United States, our commitment to free speech, it's so intense that everything else has to be a narrow exception.
Oof.
So I'm allowed to say the nastiest things about you. It doesn't mean you can sue me. I can harm you through my speech. I can destroy your business. I can try to go on all these different platforms and just sow lies and encourage people to lie about you. Doesn't mean you can sue me for it. Because ultimately, there is an argument that as Americans, part of our free speech right is to lie, that we are permitted to lie. Now, it's not completely true. That's where defamation comes in. But defamation is a very narrow element. It doesn't mean that all lies can be sued for. It just means very, very specific lies are not permitted. And in this case, and the judge is correct, and let me just say that when I first read the cases, I thought it was sad. I thought that if Cassandra spoke to an attorney for an hour, spend her $250, $350, $500 for that 1 hour, a legitimate attorney would have told her, there is no case, you're wasting your time. This was clearly to me, and again, it has nothing to do with the fact that somebody might have harmed you, might have lied about you, might have done terrible things. It's just that in defamation, you have to focus on facts. And you have to actually say, these are facts. You're not allowed to lie about facts that the court can actually determine. You can voice opinions all day long. So she could have called her a racist all day long. She could have told her that she's a white nationalist. All of those, and the court saw it that way, are opinions. Might be despicable opinions, might be false. She might have known it's false. But they're opinions. They're too generalized. It's not like she's saying she did X, Y, and Z, you know. If you actually point to those facts, then you can say, find defamation.
But wouldn't the court recognize that there's a general definition of what a white supremacist is, or what white power means?
That exact sentence is the problem. A general definition, which means that there could be other ways of looking at it. If I look at it, how many different ways can you define alt-right? More than one way, probably. And there's more than just you. And
technically, right? So it's like 99% of people, including the Associated Press, they put out standard guidelines for what alt-right means. But because, look, in my opinion, I think the people... let me start over. According to the Associated Press, Wikipedia, most general definitions, and I mean most, I mean like the overwhelming majority, 99%, is that alt-right refers to white nationalists. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a lot of people on the right don't like, actually says alt-right means somebody who fears white identity is under attack, and that they, have a right to form their own ethno-state and things like that. The AP, the Associated Press, says this is our standard, right? And that's the AP is used by almost every outlet. So then, in my opinion, the people who are working at these news organizations who would then call someone like Jordan Peterson alt-right, yeah, they're doing it because they're trying to slide in a smear against him to insinuate. I mean, we just had a woman call him an incel, called Jordan Peterson, who's married with children, an involuntary celibate. Yeah, that's physically impossible, and said that he was a white nationalist. They know they're not really white nationalists or they're not really alt-right.
Can you find me a group that would define alt-right differently? That somebody else would say, and not just one guy, some blog guy, somebody in his mom basement. I'm talking about a group that would feel that alt-right is just a definition of people to the right of what conservative parties are. They have proposition that are slightly more conservative or maybe even extreme. I mean, that's what the court sees it. It sees that it can find multiple legitimate definition of a same thing. It says, well, there is not a single truth here. There is one might be more acceptable than the other, but if there are multiple definitions to the same term, then that would be an opinion. So when somebody flashes the sign here, to me it means okay. Is there any other definition to that?
Yes.
Right.
But hold on. So the OK symbol actually can be a bit ambiguous because it's used in scuba diving.
Right.
The OK sign. It's also used as the if you see it, I get to punch you. Right, symbol.
That's if it's upside down. And
yeah. When you hold it upside down and you say, "Hey, look," and they look at it, they see this sign. But then you have a very recent phenomena where it is an admitted hoax, where a group of people on the internet were trying to trick people into believing that it meant something it didn't. So when it's covered by most major outlets, when even the nonprofits that are considered what's the right word? I can't think of the word. I'm brain farting, but they are the experts on the issue.
Right.
Anti-Defamation League says it is not white power hand gesture. It is a hoax.
Right.
Then you have most people can say, okay, we know that definition is not true, but then someone claims it is.
Right. So you would argue that just because somebody says it is, the court should not give it any deference. And I don't disagree with you, but the way the court sees it, there is multiple definition to that symbol, even if what you describe it is completely false. It's not a singular definition, and as a result, it says, you know what? That's an opinion.
But
even though it's an outright lie, it's still an opinion it's a false opinion, not a false fact.
Okay, let me ask you something. Do you know what this hand sign means? So for those that
Hopefully,
are watching, I'm
victory.
holding up 2 fingers because there's people listening. They might say,
Okay.
I'm holding up 2 fingers, and you said it's the peace sign.
Or victory. Yeah.
Well, 4chan said it means 2 genders.
Okay. I don't know that.
Yeah, so another hoax they perpetrated was that they took a bunch of photos of people holding up what is it's actually interesting. We call it the peace sign.
Right.
It actually means victory,
Right.
and peace came after victory. That's why we use it that way. But 4chan decided that it meant 2 genders, so they started showing all these photos of Obama and Hillary Clinton holding up the sign, saying, they would put it's
Right.
2 and then the G. Is that now an accepted definition the courts would have to acknowledge?
No, but it's not. They don't have to accept it. But they can acknowledge that it's ambiguous enough not to be considered a fact. And that's all they were looking at when she said they're flashing the white nationalist party or whatever.
White power hand gesture.
White power.
Yeah.
Okay, they're saying that that's her opinion. The same way I can say Tim is a racist. Tim is an awful human being. I can say a lot of things, even lie about it. But you would say, do you know what a racist is? Can you define it? Yes, but that's still an opinion.
So
it's my opinion that you fit that definition. It's not fact.
So I will add, just for the sake of
You're not.
the podcast. No. I'm going to say that I ultimately will defer to your expert opinion on all of this, and I'm simply going to try and give you some pushback, some questions because of my trying to better understand it.
No, but
I think you're right.
You don't have to accept it. This is a judge making a decision.
Right.
It's the way I thought when I saw the case, but you can see how a judge would think otherwise as well. So this is actually a factual statement and not.
But so here's the thing. If it is your opinion that something isn't factually true, then I could actually lie about you and you can't prove it. I can say my opinion is that you are a biologist who has, smuggled cocaine from Cuba into Florida.
That's not an opinion. That is something a court can actually judge.
So what if I said you're a cocaine smuggler? He has done things in the past that shows he's a cocaine smuggler.
Because you use the word cocaine and smuggler, I would say that gets closer to being a fact. If you say Lior is a drug dealer, that might be opinion because you might think that might be a more generalized. I understand that it sounds ridiculous, but the idea is I'm allowed to express an opinion, even a false opinion about you.
Right, so then isn't it an opinion then that when I saw the white powder on your mouth that everyone knew to be from a powdered donut, and I said, in my opinion, that's cocaine?
Yeah.
Would I be able to then go to this woman, Emma Roller, had 30-something thousand Twitter followers. She worked for a massively funded mainstream, it was a blog as part of a large media group that owns like the Gawker networks. If I went to this massive platform and posted a photo of you with powdered sugar on your mouth and said, that's cocaine, or just a man with cocaine all over his face, that's allowed.
It's interesting what you're saying, and I don't know if that would be opinion, but to me it almost seems.
What's the difference?
It's hard to judge. I'm saying this is what it is. It's very hard. But I don't have a problem with you thinking it's a fact. But to me, it seems more like satirical. Because at that point, am I really meaning it? I can say satirical things. I'm allowed to criticize you through what would seem like a lie, but it's only because I'm trying to either create a satire or a parody. I'm trying to make fun of you. All of that is permitted. It's highly protected forms of free speech. Now you have to say, well, when he said that was cocaine, did he meant it factually? Yeah. And how did other people see it? Is it likely that they thought it was?
That's true for Cassandra. Soledad O'Brien. She got, I think, 6,000 retweets saying something like, this is happening in our country. People genuinely believed that this was factually accurate, that it was a fact, even though Emma Roller herself admitted she knew it was likely a hoax. Like, we know it's a hoax.
Okay. Again, the whole case did not rest on that one point.
The
first one.
Well, I'll say this: the whole case rested on, I think, in my opinion, a terrible lawyer.
I don't disagree with.
Not trying to be a dick to the lawyers.
It was a terrible case. There's no doubt. That's it. My first impression was I felt sad for Cassandra. This lawsuit should not have been filed here. So I'm not disagreeing with you that this was a terrible lawsuit, but I mean, first of all, their idea is you can't get to defamation without saying it's a statement of facts, and the court held that this was not. It was an opinion. And like I said, two judges can take a look at it completely differently. You don't have to accept. It's not. I accept your argument. I don't say you're wrong at all.
No, yeah.
When I saw it, I thought that this was an opinion.
So I'm just trying to like, I'm just trying to like sort of, you know, I don't know, dialectic, we'll say that. No. So I guess my idea is, if there was a photo of you in the White House with powdered sugar on your face, and I said just a man with cocaine all over his face in the White House, and you could prove it was not cocaine, would that help you in any way in a suit against me for defamation?
Well, I would have to prove that it's false, because truth obviously is a defense. So if it's cocaine, I have a problem here. But if it's false, again, the argument for the other side could be that no reasonable person thought it was correct, that it was satirical, it was meant to poke fun, maybe an expression of what you thought of me. There's a lot of ways to get around that idea. It's up to the judge to decide whether or not it's fact or not, whether or not that was actually a satirical comment or really was an indication of a fact that you're trying to push that is in fact cocaine. And so it's going to be contextual. Who you are, what generally you're saying, how people take that. It's not a simple argument.
In the case, I think, I could be wrong, but based on my reading of it, one of the biggest contributors to Cassandra losing was that she had tweeted something about her photo saying it's so easy to troll these people. Cassandra's explanation, which she said she never got a chance to actually tell the judge or talk to any court about, was that she meant troll as in being Trump supporters in the White House, because the press is typically seen as anti-Trump. She meant trolling in that showing a sign of which the OK sign comes from Trump when he speaks.
Right.
Her thing was, it doesn't mean white power. She meant Trump supporter. Like, haha, you know, the left is so angry that Trump supporters are here. And the judge, it looks like, and he thought she was admitting that she knew these people would be tricked into thinking it was a white power hand gesture.
So
right?
Now that I'm trying to defend a judge, and I don't know anything about these characters, like I said, I don't get involved in, so I read those cases without knowing anything about them. Looking at the paper, that's what I thought. That she meant that she purposely provoked. So that's not, the fact that she did not have an opportunity to say anything is completely irrelevant. It's up to her attorney to have filed the documents that said that. So whatever her attorneys did is pretty much what she did. You know, she could claim that she never read the right attorneys, but that's another issue altogether. When I read the document, that's what I read. And I see that's what because I don't know who she is, and it seems to me that she was acknowledging that she was effectively trying to provoke, that was what she was trying. She knew how easy it would be to provoke that kind of response. So what do you expect? What's the likelihood of a judge having followed her Twitter account and knowing who she is and what she was trying to do? It's all in the document, so that's all that there is to do. So it could be that it was done incorrectly, that the judgment was wrong. But you know, all you can do is based on what her attorney actually said.
It just shocks me that, you know, I had an organization lie about me, called me alt-right, said I had spoken at some Holocaust deniers conference.
Well, now I'm sure they'll call me because I'm with you.
Oh, right, yeah, no, guilt by association.
Yeah.
But no, it was the SPLC. They retracted and apologized to me, and then affirmed that I am a person on the left. Right, I am not alt-right. So I just don't understand why they caved to this legal threat when it seems like so often, especially the SPLC, there have been many instances where they have accused certain people of being things they're not. They called, I don't know if you're familiar with Majid Nawaz.
No.
He's, I'm fairly certain he was a former Muslim extremist who is now a reformist and wants to, you know, pull people away from terrorism. But they called him an extremist. Like, they recently pulled the article down, but they never apologized. They never, you know, he's been suing them for a long time. It seems like so often you see these organizations, you see someone like Emma Roller put out bad information which negatively affects our country, our culture, our politics, and it's okay. They get away with it.
Did she ask for an apology, Cassandra?
Yes. The first thing that Cassandra asked for was a simple apology and retraction.
Through the lawsuit, or
no, before the lawsuit. It was like, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that the first thing they did was send a letter saying, please retract and apologize for this false statement.
Was this ever actually published on Splinter, or was it?
It was just her Twitter account.
Twitter?
Yeah, it was Emma Roller's Twitter account. They wanted her to just tweet out, that's not true.
See, that's why I can get why they see it as opinion, because it wasn't actually published. It wasn't like an official stance from. Well,
Splinter's was legally defending her too. So here's a question: would a reporter posting a tweet and then being defended by the news organization's legal team, would that tweet then be considered part of the official reporting?
I don't think it necessarily that would not be an important element today, but more likely whether or not she worked for them, because ultimately you want to sue the people that have money.
So she works for them, and she includes. So here's one of the arguments: she works for them.
I would look, if I'm her attorney, I'm suing everybody, including her grandmother. So yes, you would sue the newspaper or the media company, because you're going to say that she spoke on their behalf.
I want to come back to this because I think there's some interesting stuff, but I wanted to just go back to the point I was making before that. Why is it that in some instances, well, I guess it's a pointless question to ask, but it does seem like so often there are news organizations that just lie, and they get away with it all the time. Like NBC called Jordan Peterson alt-right. Right. You know, like that's factually inaccurate to an extreme degree.
But they cannot be sued for it.
But here's the thing: Jordan Peterson speaks out against the alt-right on a like an almost daily basis. So
okay.
how can NBC put out...
Because the reason why Cassandra lost was not because of the fact. That was just a gateway. The reason she really lost was, again, an unforced error by her attorney. The attorney wrote a lot about how great a journalist she is. How many publications, how many articles, how many tweets, how many followers. He made her into a public figure. Now, the attorney probably thought that this would impress the judge more. The problem is the minute you admit to it, as a public figure, the standard that you have to meet in a defamation case is almost impossible. It basically has to be that she knew at the moment that it was false statement. It's basically an outright knowledge of the falsehood of that statement. And you find that in most cases, these public figures, politicians, celebrities, bloggers, journalists, people that at some point are impacting our society, that have some sort of an impact. There's no real definition of what it is. It's almost impossible for them to sue when they are being lied upon.
Isn't that scary, though?
It is.
I mean, people could come out and just... They could literally destroy your life.
Yes.
They can contact your employer. They can... I mean, when NBC publishes a story to millions of people calling you a white supremacist, essentially... I mean, look, there's nuance between alt-right and white supremacists, but you're somebody who wants a country only for white people. Right. Yeah, now you're going to try and speak places. I mean, let's actually... We can talk about Sargon. Sargon tried to book a venue in New York to speak, and they canceled on him. They said, no, we're not going to do this because of the smears, because of the campaign against him. He's a I don't know his exact political leanings, but on a political compass, he's a center-left libertarian guy, anti-authoritarian, anti-identitarian. He attacks the alt-right and the far-left all the time, and people in the media call him far-right. They call him alt-right, and this is negatively impacting his ability to work and to exist, essentially. I mean, don't get me wrong, Sargon's doing really great for himself. But there's got to be something to stop these companies from lying about you and damaging your right to do your work. It just seems so crazy that we can't stop it.
I'm sorry to give the answer to no.
I know.
Because again, we are very different in this country than just about every other developed country in that we have this almost absolute protection of free speech, that it has to be an exception. And this fell under it was this concept that people can speak about politicians. That's where it started, because we had sedition laws. We had historically for a long time laws that forbade people from speaking about politicians, about religion, stuff like that. United States not really about religion, but it all came from England, where it started about really the religion, the church, and politicians, the king, and stuff like that. And we had that, and we had that until the 1960s. Okay, our concept of free speech basically allowed the government to sue us whenever we spoke badly about politicians and about the government, stuff like that. And there were people that went to jail all through and up until the 60s. And it was literally a monumental, tiny dissent in a 1930s decision by two of the greatest Supreme Court justices of our time, not of our time, prior to us. But we're talking about Justice Brandeis and Justice Holmes. They had a dissent in a case that said that you cannot effectively, that you cannot be sued for those kind of things. It was a fight against hate speech, about sedition, about government, about church, about, they set the stage. And over the next 30 years, what was a tiny little dissent became the law of the land. And what we have today, and it developed ultimately to the idea that this is an inherent part of our free speech right. When somebody puts themselves out, politicians, celebrities, nowadays, e-celebrities, people online, when you put yourself out, you're going to hold yourself to a different standard, understanding that you have to give people a lot more leeway to criticize you. And however unfair it seems, the Supreme Court, and now it's like basically near unanimous, are accepting the fact that you have to, unless you can prove the falsehood at the moment of statement, knowledge of that falsehood, not just knowledge, outright knowledge of the falsehood, you're not going to be able to defend yourself.
This is actually the perfect segue into, I think this will be the last lawsuit segment that we're going to talk about, the Maddox versus Dick Masterson. Because you mentioned that when you're in the public light, you're going to get criticized, these things are going to happen. And one of the issues with the Maddox versus Dick lawsuit is, you know, it's alleged that Dick was just nonstop talking about Maddox in his podcast, that, you know, Dick's fans would then go on the internet and just constantly, you know, berate and insult and, you know, call Maddox a cuck and things like that. And there was, I don't know if this is part of the legal argument, but at least from what I've heard from some people is that there's a certain point at which you are harassing someone and not criticizing them.
Right.
And, you know, from the Dick side, they were like, no way. That's total BS. Trump gets ragged on nonstop 24/7. If you're a public figure, it's going to happen forever. So how about we just start at the beginning? And you read a lot about this. You know a lot about this case?
Yes, I've done a lot. Again, I don't know the individuals. I've never followed them. I basically, if I recall correctly, I received a tweet from somebody on that followed my channel saying you may want to look at this, and I probably did 15 videos over the span, and these people did more than those, more than 15 videos on this case, and. So this is I guess I'm gonna frame it the way it's like I understand it, just so people who will understand. You know, Maddox is an online personality. He's been around since the late 90s. He's gotten billions of views on his website. He's written books, and he did a podcast with this guy Dick Masterson. They had a falling out, and then this led to what people say is like a shadow war between you know, Dick and Maddox, ultimately culminating in like alleged death threats and brigading against people's sponsors. And, you know, I'm trying to be rather neutral on the issue. I'm not trying to say one person was doing worse than the other, because I know it's a very contentious subject. But ultimately, Maddox filed a lawsuit against not just Dick Masterson, but it was another guy who was friends with Dick, Asterios Kokinos.
Yeah. Then Asterios' job.
Right,
Patreon.
his employer.
Yeah, so I guess...
some guy working for Patreon in sales.
So
literally, some guy that probably made about $30,000 doing some sales for Patreon, yeah.
All right, so there's like the very basic premise, but a lot of people kept saying to me this is so important because Maddox was essentially trying to run these people through courts simply because he didn't like being insulted. I think it's a much more complicated story than that, because he's alleged, you know, hardcore harassment, death threats against him and his girlfriend. But why don't you just carry us through and let's talk about it?
I started looking at that lawsuit when somebody sent it to me, and that one complaint, normally I can cover a complaint in 15 minutes on one video, and that's the end of it, and maybe look at it another time in a few months when the solution comes up. But in this case, I probably did 5 or 6 videos just on the complaint. It was so nonsensical. You couldn't make heads or tail on it. This has nothing to do with what Maddox is saying. The document made 0 sense. There were sentences which were just run-on sentences. You couldn't figure it out. He was referring to everybody as defendants, so you don't. So if he's saying somebody harassed me, let's say he's saying that Dick harassed me. Well, if you use the word defendant, you're now saying that Patreon harassed you, and the employer of some guy that may talk on the shows once in a while harasses you. So try to decipher that was just an enormous task.
I just realized there might be a theme to all of the losers in these stories.
Could be.
Bad lawyers. Like you mentioned the error from Akilah's lawyers, the error from Cassandra's lawyers, and now the error from Maddox's lawyers. Just seems like,
well, I mean,
hey, if you need a lawyer, make sure you don't skimp out. Get a good lawyer, because otherwise you'll...
You know, people were questioning for a long time. Maybe he didn't really hire these attorneys. Maybe he wrote it himself because it made no sense. Just nothing on paper made sense. And again, so let's say once you decipher it, you try to break it down, and I basically broke it down by different parties because I'm trying to figure out who is he suing and what. And then you start following the evidence, and you realize that, well, let's say he's saying that Dick harassed him, right? So what would you do? I mean, you know, you would say, you know what, Dick went on the show, he said X, Y, and Z against me. Or let's say you're saying that he incited other people. You say, well, he told people to go to my house, I don't know, and spray paint it, whatever it is. You know, he told him to do something. So you would expect evidence showing that, but there were none of that. The evidence, you would say that he incites people, and then he would show a text from a party that you don't know who he is, some individual that has like a Twitter name or somebody on Reddit that you don't know who he is, that he said that the lawsuit says was a follower, and they're just 2 people talking. So it made no sense whatsoever. Like, if you're saying Dick did something, tell me what he did. You know,
So-
if he incited, tell me how he showed it. And so there was just, literally, when you go through line by line, there was just no evidence at all. And it should be pretty easy, right? Dick does not hide. I'm assuming that his podcasts are freely available, or if somebody pays, you can see it. But it's not something that's difficult to see.
Yeah.
Reddit, I mean, I'm assuming there's some private group, but otherwise than that, it's something that's easily collectible. So who messed up here? I don't know. I mean, is there no evidence, or is it just bad legal work? I have no idea, but somebody messed up here.
This was like, what was like a $200 million lawsuit, I think, right?
I think even more once you count all the different causes. Everything was 20 million. You have to add it all together.
That's a ridiculous amount of money.
There was no justification. It was just because that's the number he came up with.
But but people actually ended up going into court and having to pay for lawyers and defend themselves against this.
That's the worst part of it, that you feel bad, regardless of what's your opinion about who's right and wrong. And there are people out there that know more than me about, or you, about the entire whatever battle has been going on between these two individuals for a very, very long time. You have to understand that people that had no connection whatsoever, who may have made fun of somebody, got drawn into court, and they have to pay attorneys, and they're out of pocket. And there is just enormous amount of stress. It's hard to, I don't know if you're involved in a lawsuit, but the level of stress that's on you is just crushing, even if you feel like you can win. And really, your best friend becomes your lawyer, even if you feel the lawyer is terrible. Your best friend becomes a lawyer because he's the only one who can give you any words of comfort. I had a client that I worked with for about 9 years. Just an incredible human being. Started as a client, became a friend, eventually a mentor. And the company built a big company in the money processing business, and an employee sued for something really idiotic. And depending how once you get dragged into those kind of lawsuits, and it's not personal, it's against the company, you can see the impact it has. Eventually, this man literally collapsed and died right before the lawsuit finished, because the level of stress is so enormous. So when people think that it's nothing, I'll file a lawsuit against all these individuals, each one of them face such enormous amount of stress that to me it's unforgivable.
So here's what I think. You know, for the longest time I was looking at the suit and I was just like, you know, if Dick's fans are saying it's irrelevant and he can't win, why is it relevant or anything like that? But then a few points were brought up, and after the case was dismissed,
right.
and I will mention too, I think they're allowed to refile. Is that what happened at the end of it?
Well, the reason why it could never have gone forward is because it made no sense. He can never be
in New
New York.
They can refile.
Right. No, but I'm saying that's what.
Everybody,
even though everybody knew it has to be dismissed because it cannot be in New York. Defamation is local. So you have to be in the place and actually speak. You can't be. It's not, internet is not sufficient. So it's so unique. So it was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled in New York.
Right.
But he's welcome to file in any state he wants.
So. A lot of people started saying, look, Dick won. We knew he was going to win. And I actually just went on Dick's podcast and I said, but keep in mind, maybe it was a scorched earth tactic from the beginning. Bring people through court, cause them to pay money. Yeah. Because, look, I'm not trying to insinuate anything. I think Maddox genuinely sued. I have no reason to believe otherwise. But it's possible that someone said, I'm not going to win a lawsuit. I'll just run them through court so I can run their money dry. I mean,
It happens every single day.
Usually,
unless you're flush with money, and we've seen that. We've seen that, and I apologize if I don't remember. Wasn't it? That's what happened to Gawker, right? That was killed through basically. It was a lawsuit that was filed ultimately by the wrestler.
Hulk Hogan.
Hulk Hogan.
Well, I mean,
but he didn't. But he didn't finance it. He was financed by another, by an individual. So we know that happened. We know that. He did it for revenge purposes because of a prior article. So we know if you have enough money, you can do that. I don't know if this is the case here, because it takes a lot of money to be vengeful and use the court system for vengeance. But there's definitely a lot of people that file lawsuits because they know that everything is so expensive that maybe I can just get you to settle. Because you're making a logical decision. It's going to cost me $150,000 to be proven correct, and I'm going to be proven correct. But if I pay you $50,000, this goes away, and I'm not stressed anymore. And suddenly, you've paid a jerk that doesn't deserve it. And it happens every single day.
Yeah, there's Lindsay Shepard up in Wilfrid Laurier University in Ontario has just filed a $3.6 million lawsuit against the university for what they put her through. And I had a bunch of people who, there are a lot of people who are just very, very angry about the college SJW problem. I'm not
Right.
trying. I try to avoid using SJW, but this is like I'm trying to speak from their perspective that the universities are overrun by like gender studies and intersectional feminism, so they're very passionate. And I've had a lot of people ask me, "Do you think Lindsay Shepherd will win?" Lindsay Shepherd is claiming that she has become unhireable in academia and it's derailed her career track because of the attacks against her. But what I said was, I don't think so, because she's the one who published the audio recording. You know, she went to a meeting, they yelled at her. I think it was wrong. They've admitted it was wrong, but she secretly recorded it. She leaked the audio to the press. So to then claim it was their fault that people found out about, like people are
Right.
attacking her now, to me, it doesn't seem like she can win. However, I think the school is just going to settle because it's bad PR for them no matter what. I think, you know, when faced with a lawsuit,
Yes.
they're going to find a number that's going to make everybody happy. It's going to go way down. People got mad at me. They're like, of course she has a, you know, it's not her fault. She was defending herself. They were in the wrong. Her recording herself is not. So I guess the point I'm trying to get at is.
You'd have to connect what they did to the harm done. And if they're jerks in a private meeting, but the harm was done online by people reacting to her recording.
To the news story.
They did not directly do something that caused her harm. If they recorded and released their own stuff, true. So I think your instincts are correct, because ultimately you have to connect something. If they went online and said, you know, they trashed her, you know what, she's
Right.
a liar, she didn't do X, Y, and Z, now she has something to connect to the damage done. But having recorded a private one, no matter how bad they are, and I'm not saying it happens all the time.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be insulted and harmed, you know, stay home and don't talk to anybody. It's just the world we live in. But in reality, a lot of people do us wrong.
So
you just can't necessarily sue them for it.
So I guess the point I'm trying to was trying to get at is that, yeah, she might not have a case, in my opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but I think the school will settle because, like you mentioned, sometimes it's just easier. So then I guess, you know, the reason I bring it up is going back to the Maddox Dick thing. Maybe there's a possibility that the goal from the beginning was maybe just run them through court, but also make a suit so big they might just settle for something and set some kind of precedent, right?
That is absolutely quite a reasonable approach to it, to think you could. And maybe there would have been a chance, frankly, if the lawsuit was better. If it was drafted better, if it made some sense.
Better lawyers.
I mean, the judge literally, his reaction was that he couldn't make heads or tails out of it.
Yeah.
If the judge tells you can't actually figure it out, he didn't draft the right document here. So maybe if that was the strategy, he needed somebody needed to do a better job in just connecting the details and not confusing the judge and writing complete sentences, simple things that would make sense when somebody is reading who doesn't know anything about you and what's happening.
I thought there was a possibility that it would be settled, and one of the goals from maybe Maddox's side was simply to get people to admit to some fault in some way through a settlement. Like if they settled, then he could say like, "See, it's true," you know, or something.
The problem is who would settle. Patron would not settle, because that would set a terrible precedent, because ultimately he's complaining that they should have dropped Dick Masterson from their service, and how are they involved here? That would set up a huge precedent for them to pay out every time somebody's unhappy. You know, they don't want to have Tim on, you know, they'll be liable for it. That's a terrible precedent. You know, you can't imagine, if Kokinos' employer, Weber Shandwick, I believe, is big enough, they would not want to settle either, because ultimately, again, they'll be finding themselves to be a target here. So who's going to, my gut feeling, Dick Masterson would not have settled, because it's a fight. They've been having this fight for a long time. I don't think he would have settled, because I think he would want to become a winner out of it. He wanted a resolution that he would be on top. He would not be interested in paying off. If there was some potential settlement, maybe with some of the smaller people that could not afford and support the lawsuit, you know, I think that there would be enough pressure online for them not to settle. So I don't know if they would have done it.
I was just watching an episode of Star Trek when I was flying out here, and it's about this guy who's going to negotiate between these two warring tribes that have been fighting forever. Mm-hmm. And the Star Trek crew is trying to explain to him, like, here's what they're fighting about. And he says, none of that matters. And they're like, what do you mean? It's like, and he goes, of course there's going to be a land dispute. Of course there's going to be a monument. But they're not fighting over that. They're fighting for personal reasons. So the only thing that's going to end this fight is something personal. And so, you know, the reason I bring that up is I'm like, they wouldn't settle. Yeah, I think you're right. Because it's too much of a personal issue. It's not about actually getting the money. It's about being the person whose name is next to the W, the winner. You know, and so in the instance of the show, though, they're like, we can bring people together. But in this instance, I think the personal makes it, I have to win. This is me. It's ego, you know?
Yeah. Again, so I don't see Maddox refiling. I think it'll be a grave mistake because the only place to file is California, and there's a reason why we see more and more lawsuits in New York than we do in California about this kind of stuff, is because California has what's called an anti-SLAPP law, which many basically lawsuits against journalists that said, if you try to stop me from speaking, I can file a simple piece of paper saying that this is a SLAPP lawsuit. The tables turn. You now have to prove that you have sufficient evidence to carry, or you facing attorney fees.
Was it strategic lawsuit against public participation?
Exactly.
Because I just had to deal with this with the SPLC.
Right,
So I was like talking to a lawyer, and he was like explaining to me SLAPP laws.
Yeah.
Oh, and then they would have to prove that they didn't harbor any doubts about you.
Well, the plaintiff now, before it goes further, has to prove that they have sufficient evidence against you, or not only will the whole thing get dismissed, but they will then be liable for the attorney fees for the defendant. So, and California did it right, because nowadays there's lots of these kind of lawsuits we're trying to shut people down. And I think that Dick Masterson would have a valid argument that he's being sued because of what he's saying. That he has a valid right. You're allowed to criticize and make fun of people. It's part of our free speech. People don't have to like it, but it is part of what we are basically constitutionally guaranteed. And when you're filing a lawsuit to stop something because you don't like what you're being said, that's a SLAPP lawsuit, and that would expose Maddox to a huge amount of liability.
I feel like there's got to be some threshold, though. I mean, I get it. Like I love free speech,
right?
But if someone is trying to destroy you through lying, and we're putting in more and more protections to protect the liars, that scares me. That's not free speech. That's manipulation. It's a form of force against someone to shut them down and cause damage to their livelihood. It's an attack. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, you can be pro-free speech and not like all the applications of it. There are a lot of terrible application of free speech that you would not support, but it's the classic case, Skokie, I believe in the 70s, Nazis wanting to march through a predominantly Jewish
ACLU.
Neighborhood of Holocaust survivors, and he goes to the appellant level, and they say, no, it basically the Nazis have the right to do it, no matter how much damage and harm it causes you.
Right.
And you have to understand that's all. Yeah, you have to support things that you just find so objectionable that when you speak, people cannot shut you down. And I know it's a price to pay, and obviously.
Well, hold on. But there's a difference between a bunch of neo-Nazis walking through the streets, not causing physical damage to property, and just saying terrifying things, and someone saying things to trick people so that those people will cause you harm, take money from you, destroy your livelihood.
See, so there you can argue that if you do something that actually is illegal, you can sue for that. Speech is rarely going to be the basis for the lawsuit, but in something like that, if you can prove incitement, which is also very difficult, because if I tell somebody, some rival attorney to tell people, everybody should go and throw eggs at his house, that's not going to be incitement unless let's meet right now on this and this street and do it. So you have to prove that much of much detail.
So let me ask you then: if someone tweeted in last January, punch a Nazi, it's a moral imperative, over and over again, right? Yeah. And then later started accusing someone of being a neo-Nazi, could you argue incitement?
No.
You're
going to lose. First of all, you'd have to start with the actual facts. I tweeted punch a Nazi, and 30 minutes later somebody went and punched a Nazi. You have to prove that.
No. So if somebody tweets, basically, after Richard Spencer got punched, everybody was tweeting punch a Nazi. Right. They were saying it is our moral obligation, go punch Nazis. And then activists started, some of these same people were then accusing whoever they wanted of being a Nazi, lying. So when there's a mob essentially screaming, we're going to punch Nazis, and then someone points to you and says, that's a Nazi.
Okay, so that's contextual. Yes, there have been cases like that.
And that's what's happening.
There's been essentially mobs on groups or mobs on the streets that just get riled up because they see a movie or something like that. They're riling themselves up, and then somebody, that kind of a scenario it's all contextual. You have to prove all those details together, but it just says it's very difficult. So I agree with you, but that's difficult.
So this is one of the big concerns about the Emma Roller Cassandra thing is implying that she's flashing a white power hand gesture.
Yeah.
You've got a bunch of, it's almost like the people in media, they all know each other. Like, obviously not everybody, but a lot of them do. They have the same politics. And it's almost like they're playing this twisted game of telephone where one person will be like, this person is a white supremacist. This person was flashing a white power hand gesture, and this person is alt-right. And then when all these stories go out at the same time, someone's going to see that and say, wow, it must be true because I've heard it so many times. And then the activists start screaming, you have to punch these Nazis. And then these people get physically attacked. right? It's
Right.
like
So, but I mean, see, that's difficult because then you have to connect the person who
No,
has
no,
been tweeting punch a Nazis and people that have identified them as Nazis, and there's no connect. That's not incitement.
Right,
so
right,
it's
right.
very difficult to do that.
I'm just saying that
we are all feeding into. Again, it's gonna be hard for you to put that together
No,
unless
right.
there's some sort of a group mentality that you can point to. Some people
There
that are
is.
no, but it's more than that. It's like literally like a mob on the street. Some group. The very fact that there's two different people who might be pursuing the same interest
so
is not a group.
what if-
It's hard to put them together and make one liable for the actions of the other.
So let's say there's people on Twitter and they have hashtag the resistance in their profiles. 100 people all say the
Yeah.
resistance, and half of them are tweeting, everybody you go out, you see a Nazi, you have to punch them, because this was a huge trend. This was going crazy. I mean, like, they were viral memes showing this guy getting, Richard Spencer getting punched in the face. And then what happens if then other people in the resistance start saying these are the Nazis? They're using the same hashtag. They're maybe not in the same group or anything, but you can see that they're part of some kind of ideology.
that they know that when they do this,
Yeah.
the result will be. Look, you got an interesting argument. It's going to be very, very difficult.
Oh, I agree.
Incitement is such. Our protection of free speech is so huge that this little exception of incitement has to be specific. So
Right.
you're asking the court to jump through hoops here to find that to be incitement.
Oh, no,
You're going to have to be lucky to find that judge. I'm saying it's
I'm
not
not-
a bad argument. I'm not
Well, hold on,
disagreeing
no,
with
no,
you.
I'm
It's
not,
just not easy.
I'm not saying the courts should stop that. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to ask, like, what. So what I'm basically trying to point out is that I much prefer protections over free speech than
Right.
the inverse, like the opposite. But I think we are, as a society, facing a problem where you have tons of people in media advocating for violence, direct violence. You've got people actually showing up on the streets, wearing masks, bashing people over their heads, starting fires. And then you have people pointing out faces and posting faces on walls saying Nazi, Nazi, Nazi. So it's like in Boston last May, there was a libertarian group of people who were holding a rally in a small gazebo, maybe like 20 people. One of them was an Indian man. His Vashiva, he's a Republican candidate, I believe. He had people behind him holding a sign that said, Black Lives Do Matter. Some other guy was saying, Stop Monsanto, like very lefty libertarian kind of things. And someone started, for whatever reason, 40,000 people showed up screaming Nazis at this group in this gazebo, even though it was a brown man.
Right.
And so when you have these activists pointing, knowing these mobs will show up at the slightest Nazi, and then they'll go on their websites. Right. The SPLC will accuse me of being all right. Emma Roller will accuse Cassandra of flashing white power hand gestures. To some extent, like, these people understand there is a mob out to beat Nazis. It has been trending for a while. Antifa just got into a big brawl with Patriot Prayer up in Portland. So I'm not saying any of these individuals are trying to start mobs, but like, we're getting to a point where something has to be done about the lies, because violence is starting to, political violence.
You can draw that, says within the current environment, a certain word is a flashpoint. Like, if you're in a highly overheated environment, calling somebody a Nazi can be a flashpoint that can start a violent reaction. And you can say that's no different than me going into a closed theater and screaming fire.
Right.
Because otherwise, you can scream fire all day long outside. Nobody is going to sue you. But in that particular environment, given everybody's locked up together, it is a flashpoint. So I think you've got a good point there. I'm not just saying it's not easy. You would have to put it all together to show that there's a heated environment, that everybody's aware exactly what's happening, and they're using trigger words to move the mob. So not just the mob. Obviously, you're going to go after the mob itself for hurting people, but also the people that are triggering it should be pulled in.
And what if they don't get physically attacked? What if it leads to death threats? Like, someone like Cassandra has got 140,000 followers. She gets death threats all the time. If someone falsely accuses her.
Go after the people that providing the death threats. We saw that in the Maddox versus Dick Masterson, where there were maybe a handful of tweets that I would say those might be actionable. You might want to call the police on these people because it's some scary stuff that they're saying.
Those are Dick's fans, you're saying?
Well, I'm seeing a tweet from an individual.
Right.
They're being identified as his fans. I have no idea.
Allegations.
Again, as the judge, you're looking at the document. Somebody's alleging it. We don't really know. But unless you can prove that incitement,
let me rephrase that.
Then you can't go further than that.
I just want to make sure I have the facts clear. So I'm not trying to put you on a spot or anything. But that the lawsuit alleges that there were some accounts making death threats towards Maddox.
Yes.
Okay. Just
Oh, yeah.
right, and I think it would make sense.
Or his girlfriend, yes.
Yeah, to go after the individuals.
Definitely go after the
yeah,
individuals.
they broke the law.
Exactly, that's clear.
Right,
go
right,
after
exactly.
them, you know, unless you can prove that that everybody understood it as a joke. There was, there's some pictures of smiley faces around it, something like that. But it was pretty serious stuff. Go to the police. It's scary stuff. I mean, if I got it, I would take it to the police. But taking it further to show that it was somehow that Dick is responsible for it, you've got to go beyond that. You've got to show, if you can set up that kind of environment where it says, you know what, he's been feeding them that kind of information, then show that what he's feeding them. If he's saying certain things, show it. But that never came along.
Right.
And you can't just throw a statement, this guy's some unidentified guy that I say is a follower said some bad thing. As a result, this guy should be sued.
No, yeah. No, I didn't want to bring to allege that Dick or Maddox were in any way. Just the general idea of when it comes to people on the internet who are. Look, I don't think I'm pretty positive. I haven't gone through all of Dick's tweets, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't advocate violence against other people and tell people to go do these things. But there are journalists. I'm going to air quote here journalists. They're activists working in media who repeatedly say punch a Nazi. It's actually a violation of Twitter terms of service to advocate violence, but they do it anyway. Because I guess punch a Nazi is kind of a special thing, you know. And I guess I just have to say it. I don't like Nazis at all, right?
It's hard to find lots of people that do nowadays.
But that's the point I'm bringing up, is that the media is so crazy that I get accused of being alt-right, which is ridiculous because they literally don't like me. Like they don't like me for how I exist as someone of my background. But there are journalists who advocate for violence, encourage others to engage in violence, viral memes of violence. And then people pointing the finger saying that's the Nazi. You know what I mean? Not to say that
I agree with you. I think that once you feed into an existing problem, either you create that problem, you create that kind of environment, it's a very toxic environment, and then burn some match in it, or you recognize it and you're just feeding into it. You maybe should be pulled into it. I'm just saying it's a difficult case to.
No, right. I'm not saying I don't want people to think that I'm advocating for lawsuits against people who are doing this or criminal charge or anything like that. Just that. We're in a place now where lies are going to start having real consequences, and protecting freedom of speech means that people are going to be put in these dangerous situations. I mean, I have to take serious considerations when I go to. I was in Berkeley before an event. I went to a skate park. I went to a little park with some skateboarding, and one guy pointed to me and accused me of being a white supremacist or something, because people lie about me on purpose.
Yeah.
Look, I'm going to say this:
you've been put in danger because of a lie that's not connected to any one individual. Just somebody throws it out there.
And I will say this: I know for a fact there are people on the far left who know full well I am not a white supremacist, but also know that by posting on a forum that I am, it will get me physically hurt. And they're trying to do that. That's a fact. Yeah. I've received death threats from these people. I've had a guy comment on my Facebook page saying, liberals get the bullet, and then commented, another week later saying, you'll be the first against the wall. These are people who know who I am, and they know that I'm a liberal. They know that I don't agree with white supremacy and the alt-right, but they want me to get hurt, right? And so I can't, what am I going to say to a judge? This guy said liberal get the bullet. What does that mean?
Exactly.
It's
a very difficult lawsuit, and I'm not trying to minimize the real risk that people are facing nowadays. That we are paying a huge price for this kind of is but a purest freedom of speech.
I like freedom of speech more.
I understand
I'll pay the price.
But everybody claims they have freedom of speech. England claims they have freedom of speech too, but they can put you in jail if they don't. If you are insulting a religious minority.
If you make a joke about a Nazi pug.
Exactly. No, they have laws. I mean, literally, it's the historical. We came out of the British system. They just didn't develop as further as we did, where we actually systematically let that concept to go.
We're more evolved.
Yeah, I'm sure the British would not agree with that. But legally, from a legal system, I think we absolutely are. Now you have to say, well, would you rather have a system where the government actually comes in and tells you cannot say certain things against minorities, religion, races, sexes, and all this kind of stuff, or do you want freedom of speech? You can't have both. Yeah. Most of the world does not have what we have.
Not even
Nobody
close.
has this kind of a system, and so we're paying a price for it, especially in this kind of a world where everything is digital and so easy to say things about people.
I know a comedian who was hosting a very famous show in Brazil. He's a famous guy. His name's Rafinha Bastos, and I might break the story a little bit, but essentially, a celebrity in Brazil got pregnant, and he's this late night comedian on a talk show, and someone said, "Do you think she's still attractive?" And he goes, "I'd do her and the baby." Okay. That was illegal. He was threatened with prosecution. They don't have free speech.
It's just a bad joke here. That's all.
Yeah, it was a really offensive bad joke. Everyone was gasping. And I mean, you're like you're.
I would. I feel bad about.
We're Americans.
I feel bad about laughing, but I am laughing.
No, but we're Americans. I mean, George Carlin had a bit where he said racial slurs over and over and over again to make a point, and everyone laughs at it because we understand context. But in Brazil, there's no free speech, so he lost his job and he was threatened with criminal prosecution. Mm-hmm. He has a lot of fans. Didn't happen. I don't know the full details of the story. He's been working again since. These things kind of roll. They pass by. They can't think of the phrase. But there are a lot of countries that don't have freedom of speech even when they claim to.
Sure.
And you can make a joke and go to jail for it. So
yeah.
I'll say this. I don't like the idea of people pointing the finger and lying about others. I don't like the idea of people inciting anyone to violence. We just shouldn't do it, no matter who the person is. If someone wants to, if one of these Nazis that everyone's so scared of wants to engage some kind of violent plot, yeah, we arrest them, we stop them from doing it. That's what the law exists for. But if someone wants to walk around in the middle of the street saying really dumb things, sure, I'll be over here, you go over there and say your dumb things. This doesn't affect me. So I'd rather have that world, right? I'd rather have a world where a weird guy in a clown costume is screaming about the end of the world and the moon being made of cheese than
just walk down the street here, yeah.
Yeah, right. Then it scares me that there are some places on the planet where you could say something in some countries like, I just don't know if I believe in God, and get arrested.
Yeah.
In some countries you can say, I'm not a big fan of the king, and get arrested. So I'm kind of glad with all its problems.
In the big parts of Europe, you cannot even question the Holocaust.
Yep.
It doesn't make a difference. It might be an opinion.
It's so crazy to me.
It's
you by all means be a crazy weirdo. Just be a weirdo. Be a crazy person. And I just don't. Get it,
You just have to look what's going on in England, which was a surprise to me when at first, because of what happened with the Nazi Pug case.
Yeah,
I started reading more and more into how our legal system developed, and it really did surprise me how there's actually laws in the Western countries where if you're offensive to religious minorities or racial minorities, you go to jail.
That's crazy. Offensive.
It's not Iran here, right? It's not some place that everybody can say, it's really a problem with our country. No, we're talking about England. We're talking about you go to jail in Germany for denying the Holocaust. I think that after all those years, if somebody wants to deny it, let him deny it. I mean, the easiest way to discredit somebody is let him actually speak his mind.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I agree.
Absolutely.
But
one of the things that we brought up, we'll wrap things up here. But the last thing I want to say is, in the UK, I tried looking up a quote from Richard Spencer because he used a racial slur. Some guy was arguing with me saying he never used a racial slur. That's BS. He's never done that. And I'm like, what do you mean? He does it all the time. And so I went on Google and I couldn't find it. I'm like, where's this story? It was like a big story. At the bottom, it said, certain search results have been removed under the UK whatever act or something. Now, I don't know if they removed that story. What I can say is certain stories were removed, so it is entirely possible. When the UK says, Google, you can't show these things, they're offensive, Google removes only the most offensive things the guy has said.
Right.
And then then a sanitized version of them exists to British citizens. So this guy thinks Richard Spencer never used a racial slur. He has. But
what you're saying is disturbing to the extent to which you and as an American were not able to access it. It's one thing if England, and there's lots of problems right now in Europe. I just spent 2 days on live chat just talking about European laws and Article 11, Article 13, and all that big mess. And there's lots of people have different opinions about what you're trying to do here. Whether or not they're trying to censor people, they're trying to control people. You know what? If a European country wants to control its own population by creating some sort of a geo-border around it, Google, you're not allowed to publish here. That's an argument. But if you tell me that you as an American were not able to access a story because
in the UK, though.
Were you in the UK at the time?
Right. So
you access it, can you access it here right now?
So I didn't check.
That's the thing.
So here's the thing. In the US, I have seen the stories posted on Facebook and Twitter about how he used this particular instance where he used a racial slur. I couldn't find the story when I was in the UK. What I could find was a thing saying that we've removed several search terms. Right. So again, I'm not trying to say that they literally did remove this one particular story. Just that if it is their policy to remove offensive content from Google, that means British citizens will only receive a sanitized version of Richard Spencer.
Absolutely. I was talking to a viewer on Tuesday from Spain who was saying that's exactly what happened. Spain adopted the kind of what is now being trying to be passed around the entire European Union about the idea that you cannot post a link with any sort of snippets to it on the internet without paying a fee besides having some sort of a license. Exactly, the link text kind of concept. Spain already did that, and YouTube and Google said, bye-bye, we're not going to publish Google News in your country, which destroyed their media companies because they just lost all that traffic from Google. Sometimes you're trying to do something and just being an idiot here. And he was talking about how he uses VPN and stuff to get around the geocode. He said he talks to his neighbors, and a lot of them, they don't know what he's talking about because he has information that he's getting out of the U.S. That they just don't have access to because it is sanitized. They don't have access to information about what's happening locally.
That freaks me out.
What's scary to me is if you are a person of too strong opinions, you're a racist, and you think that everyone deserves universal basic income, then the people in one country are only going to hear about you as this great universal basic income advocate. And then if they ever go to another country, they're going to be like, "Whoa, that guy's crazy."
Don't want to support him.
But that's the problem with these, with blocking speech.
Right.
Let the people say their ideas so you know to avoid them. Look, nobody. It's not black and white. There are terrible people who are anti-Semitic, who are racists, and have some normal ideas too.
Sure.
Like if some guy said his biggest position was that everyone should have a pizza night on Friday nights in the workplace, like let's say like a CEO, and that's the only thing you ever heard, you're like, I like this guy, he's the pizza guy. Except his second, third, fourth, fifth, and most largest position was like the extermination of certain peoples. But they sanitize that.
Right.
Then people are going to be like, I support that guy because he's the pizza man.
Right.
Because they don't know. Anyway, we've gone on a half an hour extra because this was a great conversation, by the way.
Thank you.
There's one more thing that I was kind of curious about ever since we were talking about like the alternative definition of the OK sign. At what point does a definition that gets pushed, even if it's not true, start being accepted as a general understanding? And could that happen with words like Nazi and racist? And could that be used against? Is that up to a judge?
If you push a false narrative, how long before it's actually being accepted as true by the court? Sufficient to probably not much, as long as the court thinks that enough reasonable people actually consider to be an alternative definition. That at that point it becomes an opinion, and
That's
calling
terrifying.
Somebody that a line like a Nazi just becomes an opinion and not a fact.
And so now what happens is there is a small group, and it is a very small group, that believes alt-right simply means conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And they're now calling everyone alt-right, but the official definition from the nonprofits, from even on Wikipedia and from the Associated Press, is it means white nationalist. So now they're going to argue, oh, no, and by our opinion, it means something else. So we can now...
Yes.
So
I would say that court will look right now says alt-right is an opinion. If I'm calling you an alt-right, you would say it's fact because 99.9 believe a certain way, but the court will not see it that way.
That means white supremacist is an opinion. That means...
Yes, it is.
That means privilege is an opinion. That means what whiteness is an opinion. That means white person is an opinion. That means we're losing the actual reality. We're losing objective reality here. So there's an argument
I don't disagree, yeah.
There's an argument that a white person is... I actually had someone tell me this on Facebook. A white person does not mean a person of Western... a Caucasian descent or something like that.
What does it mean?
It means the dominant faction within a country as perceived by the state.
So now a white person is by definition an evil or suppressing, oppressive...
Right.
Okay.
So now there's people who are saying that. Does that mean if someone... does that mean that a group of white supremacists can now say that, black person doesn't actually refer to someone from African or sub-Saharan African heritage? It's a reference to a particular criminal class. Like, I'm not saying that I genuinely believe. I'm trying to make a point.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying.
For the out-of-context clips that are going to arise. But the point I'm making is...
What did Tim actually say?
Can they then start saying things that are ridiculously racist and offensive and factually untrue, but a court will be like, well, that's their opinion.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Basically, yes. A lot of things... It comes down to literally, if I say I saw this individual burn a cross on somebody's lawn, that's a factual issue. He's a member of the KKK. That's factual. But I say he's a Nazi. He's a racist. He's a bigot.
Cross burner.
That's an opinion.
What if they say he's a cross burner? He's one of those white hood cross burner guys.
That's an interesting argument. I don't know if that would be factual versus opinion. I don't know.
We're going to loop right back to the cocaine point. Like, there's certain ways
I
to
do
say
like
things.
donuts. But
yeah, but someone could look at a picture and be like, oh, I genuinely believed it was cocaine.
Could be.
All right. So anyway, I feel like we could probably go on forever. This has been a great conversation. So thanks for joining us and hanging out. Do you guys want to do you want to mention your YouTube channel again, your Twitter, and anything else you want to
check out my channel. It's YouTuber Law. It's also follow me on Twitter at obviously /YouTuberLaw. It's basically any sort of legal issue, legal questions, any sort of drama that can be broken down and looked at from a legal perspective that's happening online in online games and in technology.
Cool.
I'm on Twitter at MomsMolly. I also make videos for Subverse Videos, which is just youtube.com/subversevideos.
Cool. So, hey, thanks for listening or watching, whichever one you ended up doing. I've got new videos every day at 4 p.m. on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Timcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Timcast. So, again, thanks for listening. If you want to check out the podcast, every Sunday at 4 p.m., we're on iTunes and on YouTube. So, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you all tomorrow or Sunday.